Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really fundamental. How well is India actually delivering justice?
hmm
We've got the brand new fourth edition of the India Justice Report, the 2025 findings.
That's right.
Think of this report as a kind of independent health check for the whole justice system
Yeah,
across all 36 states and UTs.
exactly. And what's really powerful about this report, I think, is that it's built on solid facts. It uses official government data
Right.
to look at the capacity of, the police, the courts, prisons, legal aid services, even the state human rights commissions.
So all the key
Yeah,
pillars.
they're looking at the numbers, budgets, staffing levels, infrastructure, the actual workload on the system, and crucially, diversity within these institutions.
Okay.
So for listeners, this gives a real data-backed picture of what's actually going on.
So it's essentially an unbiased audit, and, well, right off the bat, the report seems to reveal a pretty sobering truth,
Hmm.
that the ideal of equal justice for everyone in India, it's still quite a ways off.
That's definitely the takeaway. And if there's one central challenge that just keeps popping up throughout the report, it's this persistent issue of under-resourcing
Uh-huh.
across almost the entire justice system. I mean, we're talking about the judiciary alone grappling with a staggering 5 crore pending cases.
5 crore? That's 50 million cases.
50 million, yeah. Just think about that number.
Yeah.
50 million instances where resolution, closure, it's all delayed.
It's hard to even wrap your head around, and it's not just the courts facing issues, is it?
No, not at all. The report highlights significant gaps in police staffing, for instance. Fewer officers available on the ground.
Right.
And the prisons, well, it appears they're often functioning way over capacity,
Yeah.
focus more on just containment
Mhm.
than, really rehabilitating people.
Okay, so containment, not rehabilitation.
Largely, yeah. And while budgets for these crucial areas have seen some increases over time,
Hmm.
the report points out that simply allocating more funds isn't some magic bullet.
Right. Money alone isn't enough.
Exactly. How effectively those funds are actually used often falls short. So it's a reminder that, more spending doesn't automatically mean better outcomes if those underlying structural issues aren't tackled.
Okay, let's maybe unpack this a bit further. It sounds like the report is saying we can't just fix one piece of this puzzle in isolation. The whole system needs attention, right?
Absolutely. That's a key message. The report really emphasizes how interconnected these institutions are.
How so?
Well, for instance, the courts can't possibly operate efficiently if the police are stretched super thin and maybe lack the right training or resources.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and similarly, prisons aiming for rehabilitation. They can't succeed if individuals don't have proper access to legal aid, for example.
Okay.
The sheer number of people just awaiting trial, under trials, compared to those actually convicted, that really highlights this interconnectedness.
I see.
So real lasting progress means strengthening all the parts together.
Yeah.
Police, judiciary, legal aid, prisons, forensics, human rights commissions,
Mm.
the whole spectrum.
So this India Justice Report, it's not just like a snapshot of today. It's also pointing towards potential solutions, maybe a kind of roadmap.
It does offer that, yeah.
Okay.
It presents the data, the reality, but also implicitly suggests directions for improvement.
But the critical question, I guess, as the report itself kind of implies, is whether this knowledge, whether it will actually be used to drive real change,
Mm-hmm. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
or if we'll just see more of the same problems persisting. It's a pretty significant challenge laid out for everyone involved.
It is indeed. And maybe to get a clearer sense of these challenges, let's dive into some of the specific areas the report examines. How about we start with the police force?
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
So what did the report uncover about the state of policing across the country?
Well, the national vacancy rate, it remains stubbornly high. We're looking at around 21 to 23% overall.
21 to 23% vacant posts.
Yeah. And if you break that down, the shortage of actual officers is even more pronounced, about 28% vacant. While constable vacancies are slightly lower, but still high at 21%.
So recruitment isn't keeping up.
It suggests that, despite ongoing efforts, they're just not filling the posts fast enough to meet the actual sanctioned strength, let alone growing demand. So a significant chunk of police roles remain unfilled nationally.
That's a huge gap. But I imagine this picture varies quite a bit state by state.
Oh, absolutely. Huge variations. When you look at constable vacancies specifically, the differences are quite stark.
Like what?
Well, take West Bengal. They have a massive 41% shortfall in constables.
41%.
Yeah. Whereas at the other end, you have Uttarakhand in a much better spot with only a 0.6% vacancy rate for constables.
Okay, massive difference.
It really underscores the diverse pressures and maybe different priorities or capacities states have in maintaining their police forces.
And what about women in the police? That's been a big focus area, trying to increase representation.
It has, yes. And the national target, the benchmark, is 33% women. But the current national average, still way lower. It's sitting at just 12.3%.
Only 12.3%.
Yeah. And even within that figure, it's interesting. It's about 14% in the civil police and the District Armed Reserve, but it drops to only 5% in the Special Armed Police and the Indian Reserve Battalions.
Okay.
And many states are still below even the 10% mark. Although Bihar is actually leading among the larger states, they're up to 24% female representation.
So Bihar's doing relatively better there.
Relatively, yeah. But overall, it highlights that while there's maybe some progress, getting anywhere near that 33% target for gender parity, that remains a pretty considerable challenge.
Clearly, still a long, long way to go on that front. What other aspects of policing did the report dig into? Forensics, maybe?
Yes, forensics was another critical area, and the findings there are, well, quite concerning. The report points to really significant limitations in the capacity of forensic labs across the country. They're facing chronic underfunding, often outdated infrastructure, and a severe lack of skilled personnel. All of this leads to substantial backlogs in analyzing crucial evidence.
How bad is the staffing situation?
Nationally, nearly 50%, half, of sanctioned forensic posts are vacant.
Half.
Yes. And in some states, it's even worse. Telangana, Haryana, Bihar, they're reporting vacancy rates over a staggering 70%.
70% vacancy in forensics.
Yeah. I mean, imagine a crime scene where vital evidence just sits there, unprocessed for months because of this massive shortage.
That completely stalls investigations.
It has to, right? It directly impacts the ability to bring perpetrators to justice efficiently, or sometimes at all.
That's incredibly serious. Are there any sort of brighter spots in the policing section?
Well, perhaps on a slightly more encouraging note, the report does indicate that the national ratio of police officers to the population has actually been increasing gradually between 2010 and 2022.
Okay.
And the projection is that this trend might continue. So potentially that could ease the workload on individual officers over time, if those vacancies also get addressed, of course.
Right, that's a big if. What about how regular citizens interact with the police? Any data on that?
Yeah, they looked at the growth of women's help desks in police stations.
Yeah.
That's shown some positive movement.
How so?
It's increased from about 59% of stations having them in 2021 up to 78% in 2023.
That's a decent jump.
It is. It's definitely a positive step towards making police stations more accessible, providing dedicated support for women.
But still,
yeah, that leaves 22% of police stations without these crucial facilities.
Yeah.
So progress, yes, but a significant part of the country still lacks this essential resource.
Okay. And training for police personnel. Resources there.
Well, the number of police training institutes has increased nationally from 203 to 236 between 2020 and 2023.
Okay.
However, kind of counterintuitively, some states have actually reduced their training facilities during that time.
Really? Why would they do that?
The report doesn't delve into the why, but it notes the potential impact, increased strain on the remaining institutions.
Right.
It also raises concerns about how modernization funds for the police are being utilized. Apparently, the central government's share of those grants has decreased significantly. And finally, those citizen portals states run for accessing police services online. The report found they vary hugely in what services they actually offer and even what languages are available. Big inconsistencies there.
Okay, so definitely a mixed bag for the police. Some progress, yes, but these persistent, deep challenges around staffing, resources, forensics, infrastructure, it's a lot.
It really is.
Let's shift gears now and turn our attention to prisons. What were the key findings there? Overcrowding, I imagine, is still a big issue.
Massive, yeah. Overcrowding is a deeply concerning problem in Indian prisons. In 2022, get this, 55% of prisons were operating beyond their stated capacity.
Over half.
Over half. And some were exceeding a shocking 250% occupancy rate.
250%.
Yes. Overall, the prison occupancy rate climbed from 112% back in 2012 up to 131% in 2022.
So it's getting worse.
It is. And the total prison population itself surged by 49% over that same decade.
Wow.
These aren't just statistics. You know, they represent incredibly strained resources, potentially dangerous conditions, maybe even inhumane living conditions for inmates.
I can only imagine. And severe overcrowding must just make every other problem worse, right? Like staffing.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And staff vacancies in prisons are also a serious and growing concern. They rose from 28% vacant in 2021 to 30% in 2022.
30% now.
Yeah. And actually, this has been a persistent issue, fluctuating between 30 and 40% vacant over the last 10 years.
So consistently understaffed for a decade.
Pretty much. So you've got this picture of an overburdened system, too few staff trying to manage an ever-increasing number of inmates crammed into facilities.
That just sounds like a recipe for, well, for a very difficult, potentially volatile environment.
It does. However, the report does highlight one potentially positive development on the horizon.
Okay.
That's the introduction of the Model Prisons and Correctional Services Act in 2023.
Ah, right, the new act.
Exactly. And this new legislation aims to shift the fundamental approach, moving away from just punishment towards one that emphasizes rehabilitation and reform. And it also talks about integrating technology more into prison administration, improving prisoner welfare.
That sounds like a much-needed shift in philosophy, moving towards rehabilitation. What kind of tech integration are we talking about?
Well, the report notes an increasing trend in using video conferencing within prisons.
Okay, for court appearances and things.
Exactly. Potentially reducing the need for risky, costly physical transfers. But it could also be used for, say, medical consultations or maybe even educational programs for inmates.
Right.
But the report adds the actual extent of implementation still varies a lot across different states.
Yeah.
So the potential is there, but it needs wider, more consistent adoption.
Got it. And what about mental health support for prisoners? That's often overlooked.
Severely lacking. That's what the report reveals, despite legal mandates being in place. Shockingly, no state or union territory currently meets the benchmark set out in the Model Prison Manual for the required number of psychologists or psychiatrists.
Not a single one.
Not one, which is deeply concerning, given the likely mental health challenges faced by many people who are incarcerated.
That's a very worrying gap. What about oversight? Mechanisms to ensure prisons are run properly, inmates treated fairly.
Well, there are supposed to be boards of visitors, or BOVs,
Yeah.
providing this crucial oversight.
Okay.
But the report found their visits are happening far less frequently than the required standards dictate.
So the oversight isn't really happening consistently.
It seems not. And then you have the under-trial review committees, the UTRCs. Their job is to identify and help release eligible individuals who are just awaiting trial to ease overcrowding.
Right. How effective are they?
Well, the report suggests that the actual number of people getting released is lower than the number identified as potentially eligible. So there's a bottleneck there somewhere. Though on a related note, the report does mention the new criminal law, the Varatia Negorik Suraksha Sanhita, extends statutory bail for first-time offenders. That could potentially help with the under-trial numbers a bit.
Okay, so the prison system. It's facing this complex set of really deep challenges. Overcrowding, severe understaffing are huge obstacles, but maybe some legislative efforts offer a glimmer of hope for modernization, a shift towards rehabilitation.
That seems to be the picture, yes. A lot of challenges, but maybe some potential shifts underway.
All right, let's turn now to the judiciary itself, the courts. What's the latest on that massive backlog of cases we hear so much about?
Still massive. As of January 2025, a truly staggering 5.1 crore cases pending.
5.1 crore, still over 50 million.
Yep, pending in India's high courts and the district courts combined. And get this, a significant chunk, 12%, have been languishing for over 10 years.
10 years?
And another 22% have been pending for between 5 and 10 years.
So over a third of cases pending for more than 5 years.
Roughly, yeah. On average, about 61% of cases in high courts and 46% in subordinate courts have been pending for more than 3 years. It just illustrates the sheer scale of the delays. Justice delayed.
Is justice denied, right? Is the persistent issue of judge vacancies still a major factor driving this backlog?
It seems to be, yes. The report highlights that the vacancy rate for high court judges has actually increased nationally.
Increased? Oh, dear.
Yeah, with the state of Punjab seeing a particularly significant rise in unfilled judge positions, fewer judges inevitably means a slower pace for clearing cases.
Makes sense. And what about the money, the financial resources allocated to the judiciary to help them tackle this enormous workload?
Still quite low, actually.
Yeah.
Expenditure on the judiciary as a percentage of the overall state budget. The national average is just 0.59%.
Less than 1% of state budgets.
Less than 1%.
Yeah.
And what's more, in several states and UTs, the rate of increase in spending on the judiciary hasn't even kept pace with the overall growth in state spending.
So potentially falling behind, relatively speaking?
It suggests maybe a lack of prioritization of the judiciary's resource needs, yeah. Especially given that massive backlog we just talked about.
That is certainly concerning. Are there any positive developments maybe on the infrastructure side for courts?
The report does mention the ongoing use of something called the Naya Vikas online monitoring system.
Okay, what's that?
It uses geotagging tech to track both the physical progress and the financial side of judicial infrastructure projects like new court buildings or upgrades.
Ah, okay, so better tracking of those projects.
Exactly. That kind of digital oversight is a step towards maybe better accountability, potentially faster completion of these much-needed upgrades.
But despite that, is the overall outlook for clearing the backlog improving? What are the projections?
Unfortunately, no. Based on current trends, the report projects that the level of case pendency is likely to increase significantly by the year 2030.
Increase. Even more.
Yes, increase significantly at both high court and subordinate court levels. It paints a rather concerning picture for the future efficiency of the courts.
That certainly does. Okay, let's shift focus again. Let's talk about legal aid. How effective is this system at making sure people who can't afford a lawyer still get access to justice?
Well, the framework is the Legal Services Authorities Act of 1987. That provides for free legal aid.
Right.
But the report raises some valid concerns, things like whether the available funds are being used optimally
Uh-huh.
and the uneven distribution of human resources.
Yeah.
You know, the lawyers and paralegals doing this work.
Okay. What kind of uneven distribution?
Well, one particularly worrying trend is the declining number of village legal clinics and also the number of paralegal volunteers, PLVs,
So the PLVs, why are they so important?
because they're often the crucial first point of contact
Mhm.
for people in vulnerable communities, especially in rural areas needing legal help. They provide that initial guidance.
Right, and their numbers are dwindling.
Yes, dwindling. And the report also notes that even among the trained PLVs, a significant percentage aren't actually being deployed effectively. So they're trained but not active.
That's a huge gap then, especially for reaching rural or vulnerable populations.
It really is. And the distribution of the actual panel lawyers across different districts is also uneven.
How so?
Well, for example, some states with more administrative districts actually have fewer panel lawyers compared to states with fewer districts. It doesn't seem logical.
Hmm.
The report also mentions permanent look adelants, or PLAs. They're meant to resolve disputes about public utilities before they hit the courts.
Like pre-litigation settlement.
Exactly. But their effectiveness and reach seem inconsistent across different regions.
Okay. And what about victims of crime? Does the legal aid system adequately support them, provide compensation?
That also varies quite significantly state by state. Both the amounts of compensation awarded under victim compensation schemes
Uh-huh.
and how efficiently applications are processed. Some states are doing better, but others, even states with high crime rates, are awarding relatively low amounts.
Mm.
And the rate at which applications actually get finalized is worryingly low in several states. So the support a crime victim gets can really depend heavily on where they happen to live.
So the structure for legal aid exists on paper, but it sounds like there are substantial challenges in making it work effectively, equitably, and ensuring it actually reaches the people who need it most.
That sums it up pretty well, yes. Implementation gaps seem to be a major issue.
Okay. Now let's touch on the state human rights commissions, the SHRCs. What's the situation with them? Are they functioning effectively?
Well, the report highlights significant limitations there too, primarily issues with operational capacity and severe under-resourcing. These seem to be major constraints for many SHRCs.
Under-resourced again. What does that look like specifically?
Many SHRCs are grappling with substantial staff vacancies. Some have over 60% of their sanctioned posts unfilled.
60%?
Yeah, and on top of that, key leadership positions, the chairpersons, the members are also frequently vacant for long periods.
That must cripple their ability to function.
It has to, right? It significantly hampers their ability to properly investigate and address human rights violations in their states.
So they can't act as effective watchdogs if they're so understaffed and
Yeah.
lack leadership?
It makes it incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And the performance metrics also raise questions. Case clearance rates vary hugely between commissions. And alarmingly, some commissions don't even provide complete data on their own functioning. Makes it hard to assess them accurately.
Lack of transparency there, too.
Seems so. The report also notes that suo motu action, that's when the commission takes up a case on its own initiative, without a formal complaint.
Right.
That remains relatively low across the board. And there's a noticeable lack of data on diversity within the SHRCs themselves, gender, caste, disability representation.
Okay.
Budgets, again, very significantly. Allocation and actual spending differ widely state by state. And even just basic accessibility like functional websites, easy ways to file complaints, that's inconsistent too.
So it sounds like the SHRCs, which have this idle role safeguarding rights at the state level, are themselves in pretty dire need of strengthening and support.
That's certainly the impression the report gives, yes. Major capacity deficits.
The report also specifically looked at persons with disabilities within the justice system, didn't it? What did it find there?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
And the findings in this area are, well, they're quite disheartening, frankly.
Oh, dear. How so?
Despite the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act back in 2016 mandating a 4% reservation in public employment,
Yes, I remember that.
the actual representation of persons with disabilities within the justice system, police, judiciary, prisons, is negligible, almost non-existent,
It's negligible.
despite the law.
Yes. The report points to systemic inaction, a persistent lack of awareness. It all leads to the continued exclusion of individuals with disabilities.
That's deeply concerning.
It is. And there's a significant absence of reliable data, too. Data on disability representation within these institutions, data on how accessible court buildings or police stations are. It's largely missing. So we don't even have a clear picture of the problem.
Not a complete one, no. And even when legal aid services are provided to beneficiaries with disabilities, the report raises concerns that there might be a lack of specific awareness or sensitivity to their unique needs among the providers. And maybe most tellingly, judicial training programs on disability rights. They're conspicuously absent from the National Judicial Academy's training calendar.
Wow. No training for judges on disability rights.
Apparently not listed.
Yeah.
It really underscores how low a priority ensuring inclusivity for persons with disabilities seems to be within the justice system currently.
That truly highlights an urgent need for much greater attention and proactive measures there. Okay, the report also mentions mediation, right? Especially relevant given the case backlog.
Indeed. Mediation is highlighted as a crucial and increasingly important alternative to court battles, especially with that overwhelming number of pending cases.
Right. How does mediation get started usually?
The report outlines three main paths. It can be voluntary, the parties just agree to try it. It can be court-referred, a judge suggests or orders it.
Okay.
Or it can arise from statutory mandates like required pre-litigation mediation for certain types of commercial disputes now.
Got it. Is it taking off? Is it working well?
Well, it's been gradually gaining traction and getting more legal recognition, but its growth has been kind of uneven across the country.
Why uneven? What are the challenges?
Things like inadequate facilities for holding mediations, a shortage of properly trained mediators, and just a general lack of public awareness about what mediation is and how it can help.
So infrastructure and awareness gaps.
Seems to be. And the success rates for cases that are referred by courts to mediation, they also vary quite considerably state by state.
Okay.
Plus, data on how long mediation actually takes to reach a resolution, often not consistently recorded, makes it hard to judge efficiency.
Any solutions proposed?
The report does float the idea, explores the potential benefits of establishing an all-India mediation service, maybe to standardize things, address some challenges, promote wider use.
Interesting idea. Okay, finally, this report, the IJR 2025, comes out just as India has enacted these significant new criminal laws. Does the report touch on their potential impact?
It does briefly.
Yeah.
It mentions the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, the Bharatiya Sarakar Sanhita, and the Bharatiya Saksha Adhiniyam.
Right, the three new codes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it highlights some key changes that could significantly impact the capacity and functioning of the whole criminal justice system.
Such as?
Things like introducing specific timelines for investigating and trying offenses against women and children, new provisions for first-time offenders regarding bail and plea bargaining, allowing electronic service of summons, establishing district-level directorates of prosecution, things like that.
Right, and the report's take.
It basically suggests these legislative changes will likely have pretty significant implications for resource allocation, for workload, across all parts of the criminal justice system, police, courts, prisons, prosecution, Everyone will be affected.
So big changes ahead, potentially, requiring adjustments across the board.
That's the implication, yeah.
Okay, so after this incredibly detailed deep dive into the India Justice Report 2025 findings, what are some of the most crucial recommendations that come out of all this analysis? What should be done?
The report puts forward several key recommendations, things aimed at strengthening the whole system.
Like what? Give us a few highlights.
Okay, ensuring legal aid services are available 204/7, making sure states fully comply with the guidelines for those under trial review committees, the UTRCs, to reduce needless detention.
Right, get eligible people out.
Exactly. Fully resourcing the state human rights commission so they can actually do their jobs effectively. Actively promoting mediation, much more, as a valuable tool. Prioritizing resources for the first responders, mainly the police. Making a real sustained effort to increase diversity, gender, caste, disability across all parts of the justice system. And crucially, prioritizing both money and people for better, comprehensive training at all levels.
So a pretty broad range of actions needed. Resource allocation, process compliance, diversity, training.
It touches on all those key levers, yes.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's abundantly clear, isn't it? The India Justice Report 2025 paints this really complex, multifaceted picture of India's justice system.
Absolutely.
We've seen areas where maybe there's been some progress, some positive steps,
Some incremental improvements.
but also these deeply entrenched, really significant challenges that continue to hinder the goal of delivering justice for all citizens.
That's precisely right. While you see those small improvements, the persistent overarching issue is chronic under-resourcing across so many key institutions. That, coupled with systemic inefficiencies, they remain huge obstacle.
Obstacles that need urgent attention. If that promise of justice is truly going to extend to everyone, regardless of their background or where they live or their circumstances.
And I suppose that brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, today. Given everything we've discussed, all these findings for the report, if you had to pick one single area within India's justice system, where do you think the greatest potential lies for truly transformative change? If it received focused effort, significant investment, maybe some innovative solutions, where would you put the focus? We'd encourage you to think about how interconnected it all is, as we've discussed, and the very diverse needs of India's population.
And if you are interested in exploring all this data and the findings from the India Justice Report 2025 in even greater detail for yourself, you can find the complete report, all the data, related resources, everything on their official website. That's indiajusticereport.org.
indiajusticereport.org. That's the one. It's really an invaluable resource for anyone seeking a deeper, data-driven understanding of this absolutely critical dimension of Indian society.